So on both of these games, obviously they were recorded with an orchestra. Do you have a team that you work with? Do you have a group of orchestrators you always use, a conductor, or do you conduct yourself?
Well, I conduct myself, except in the case of remote recording, which is fairly common, like you saw in Journey.
Yeah.
That was actually my first time ever doing remote recording, where I'm somewhere in the world and the musicians are somewhere else in the world, and we're monitoring through a combination of Source Connect and Pro Tools and Skype. And so in those instances, I defer to the local conductor. Although in the case of Journey, I was so nervous. I had never not conducted my own music before. So I insisted on like a 2-hour call with the conductor the day before. And we went through every single note of every bar of every cue. And I wanted to make sure that he knew what he was dealing with and knew where the tricky spots were going to be, what I thought could be easy, you know, what we would need probably 5 or 6 takes of versus 1 or 2 takes, that kind of thing. And also give him a chance to ask me any questions, just since he knew the local musicians. Certainly I didn't know them at all. He and I are now, we've worked together so many times that I just send the parts and we chat 10 minutes before the downbeat because he understands. He briefs them on all the oddities they're about to find, all the weird left turns and harmonies that make musicians often hate me rather quickly. And so I normally do conduct it though, and I have a wonderful team, a copyist I've been working with. He taught music copying in my college at USC in LA. Right. He was the one who taught us what the industry standards were for how your sheet music should look. And so when I got my first gig a month out of school, I called him and said, you just taught me all this stuff, but can you do it? I've been he's the only person I've ever worked with since in more than almost 15 years. And orchestration, similarly, I've got a team I really, really cherish. Susie Sider is my main orchestrator. She and I kind of tag team the orchestrations usually. I have a guy whose job title is MIDI transcription, who basically preps the scores for her. So it's a pattern where I write the cue, send it to him, he cleans it up and exports it into notation software. She goes through and does a polish pass to try to reconcile all the little notes I leave her in my DAW. Yeah. To make sure the score is formatted. Then she sends that to me, and I spend another hour or two going through and changing things and saying, well, she marked this forte, but I think it's actually supposed to be like piano, but the samples suck and it sounds like forte in the mock-up. It's really piano. Or what. Go through and I make a lot of changes on that, and I add all the bowings and blah, 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 and then send it to the copyist. So.
Do you get a choice on where it's recorded, or do the dev teams tell you, we're booking Air Studios or we're booking Nashville? Do you get a choice?
Basically, yes. I've never had a dev team tell me that kind of thing, but the publisher will often have requests. I mean, usually it has to be a buyout recording. That's kind of the only thing they care about. So I live in LA, but LA, the union, to work with the local union, there is no buyout contract. So I can't record in LA. There's no contract available. And so, but they're like, I don't care if you do Prague or Bratislava or Macedonia or Nashville or London or anywhere else. Here's the brief and here's the production requirements that we're kind of expecting, but how you get there is up to you. Now I have worked on projects that were not package deals where it's being managed through an audio department. Like I worked a little bit with Sony, for example, on The Order 1886, and that was one where the audio team with whom I'd worked on Journey and Flow, they run everything through in-house. So that was actually one where it's like, we've booked Air or Abbey Road, and this is where it will be, that kind of thing. Yeah. But generally, I'm left to make those decisions.
Awesome.
It's fun.
On that note, should we play the Abzu?
Sure. That was definitely one where Abzu was a rare one where they
is that Air? Abzu?
That's it all at Air. Yeah. The Abzu they just said literally do whatever you want. I mean, there was no reference music, it was just have at it. And I went down a weird, well, you'll see. We were trying to come up with a good collective noun for harp. It's like a murder of crows and that kind of. So our wonderful librarian here, Jill Streeter, came up with this beautiful term, an Ethereum of harps, since we had 7 harps. So anyway, I guess we can.
Yeah, let's play it.
Play that madness.
So when Abzu came out, obviously comparisons were drawn to Journey. I'm going to say
inevitably.
But this is my take on it, and it might be incorrect. So in Journey, I felt the music as I was playing the game was very narrative, and it actually followed the journey, and it was the emotion that the player was feeling.
We actually called the score the narrator. So
Oh, right, okay.
spot on so far. Keep going.
But with Abzu, I felt that the music was themed more about the locations rather than the...
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. Yeah, actually, I would agree with that. It is more. It is narrative still, but the narrative itself is more abstract. So it ends up being more kind of impressionistic by design. But even though it's still actually hitched to the same basic quality of following the game's narrative.
Yeah.
But Abzu had a much more kind of fuzzy goal for the narrative takeaway. You know, Journey had a very plotted Joseph Campbell archetypes kind of structure, and Abzu was going for something much more kind of ethereal, I think. And so it is very locational as a result, but it's kind of an accident almost, if that makes
I really
any
like that,
sense
though.
at all.
I love that when you sort of like went into a new environment and the music completely changed.
Well, and
I really enjoyed it.
I mean, the funny thing, Journey actually does that too. It's just usually the environment is so connected to the narrative that you perceive it as a narrative shift because the environment is the narrative.
Yeah.
And that is actually sort of true in Abzu as well. It's just such a different beast that I think you perceive it as being wildly different. But it's all, I mean, in a way I'm learning about Abzu through your questions. And I have no idea what I'm talking about. I don't even know where I am right now. Great vodka in this coffee, though. But no, for real, it was such a different process to unpack, and a totally different team, of course, other than Matt Nava, the art director from Journey, now in the creative director position. And so it was one of those that as we were going through, I thought, oh, I bet there are going to be kind of natural comparisons to Journey, but we never really referenced Journey while working on it. And when we did, it was usually like, oh, okay, here's a moment. How can we make sure it's not Journey-like, Journey-esque?
So we saw the Ethereum of harps. That's now a thing.
Yeah. Quote, full credit to Jill for that. That was one of the most fun times in the studio. It was great because these harpists had never done a gig together, I think, quite like that, or very rarely at least, where it's like, because usually there's one of them, right? Or maybe two if it's a grand Mahler kind of thing. But usually, you know, they're the one, and they get to kind of own that.
Yeah.
So I thought there'd be this territorial, like, I'm the harpist, you know, who the hell are these other people?
Well, there were screens between them.
Well, it's true, yes. That had nothing to do with sound. It was purely for the politics. And no, it was great fun, and they seemed to really enjoy. It was like a class reunion, you know, like, oh my God, it's been 10 years. And it was great. It was awesome. And it was really fun also because it wasn't written like a harp part 7 times like a violin section. It was a harp ensemble. So they were numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 counterclockwise, you know, like from right to left, basically, in this almost half circle configuration. So harp 4 in the exact center was the kind of concertmaster, this amazing woman, Skyla. And so anytime I wanted just one harp, I would usually lean on harp 4 because she's the you know, kind of the top of the roster, but also it put it in the center of the stereo field because we were dropping them into the mix exactly how they sat in the room. And so, you know, there were a lot of times where I would do harp 1 and 7 only in mirror of each other. So you have this wide open middle and the extreme left and right, this faint plucking. And then I would do effects where it sweeps left to right, where they would just say on their part, don't play until the person to your left or to your right has started. And there were a few times where I would actually trigger that manually, where I would just kind of listen and I would point and then point and then point and run it down the line and then cue them off and create these waves back and forth and all that. So it was so much fun. You could never get away with that on for any other game probably.
Were there any other things that were really different that you added to that score?
I mean, the whole thing was kind of one big experiment. You know, we worked with the London Voices Choir as well, and it was one of those where I wanted the whole score to be generally a bit top heavy. So the choir was 18 voices, 12 altos and sopranos, and then 6 tenors and no basses whatsoever. And the tenors were constantly up there with the altos. And so when we were contracting the choir, I told Ben Perry and Terry, the two that run the group, make sure that, you know, your tenors, these are proper first tenors that can sing comfortably way up high. But make sure there's some good ringers in there too, because every now and again I go as low as I can comfortably take a tenor. And they did amazing. I mean, they did the entire score in 6 hours. We blasted through all, I mean, there was 40 minutes of choral music or something like that. And we did it in 6 hours. I mean, it was unbelievable reading on these music, including there's a pretty tricky a cappella choral work that's sort of the end credits of the game. And it's like a concert piece. And I mean, they just did it. They just sang it. It's astonishing to me, even as a musician, that people just sit there and they read the notes and then just it comes out. Especially because there's a lot of 9-part harmony where it's you and the person next to you on that note, and that's it. Yeah. So you have to have a bunch of confident singers who can sing out and they don't kind of lose themselves in the section the way lesser singers might. It was amazing, and then all that had to be mixed, of course, with a little dabbling of orchestra, and there was a bunch of oboe solos that were all recorded in Florida. I found there's this amazing oboist named Kristen Nagus who gigs around orchestras in Florida, like the Orlando Philharmonic and that kind of thing, but she's a big gamer and talented musician, and so she started putting YouTube videos online of herself doing covers of video game music she liked. And so one day I get this email that says, hey, check this out, and it's an English horn cover of the theme to Journey. And she had made like an orchestral mock-up backing track for herself that was pretty well done. And then she did that little game I mentioned, Monaco, and then I did another game that no one played called Horn, wonderful little game. It sadly no one played it, and she did a cover of that too. So I was like, I need to have this person in my life. Yeah. And so I reached out to her, and Abzu was a 3-year period as well. And so at the very beginning, I reached out to her and I said, you want to record on this score? You obviously can record at home, like in your living room or however you're doing it. Yeah. Quality is not an issue. So how can we develop a kind of a pipeline? And so she kind of was initially shocked. I think she probably thought it was a prank call or something. And then started recording in 3 years, made her the star soloist of that game. And then since then, the word's gotten out, and a bazillion colleagues that feature her left her. I mean, Gareth uses her heavily as well, and it's amazing because she also plays 4,000 other instruments too. I mean, she plays basically all woodwinds. I mean, including from all over the world. So she's my secret weapon, basically, and all started with Abzu.
So you mentioned that there was some games that you worked on that hadn't been sort of like monster hits. Is there one game for you that you absolutely loved the music that you created for it?
No.
But it just didn't make...
There's no way to end that sentence where my answer's going to change.
But you didn't make it... Okay, you enjoyed writing the music for it.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But when it went to market, the game wasn't a success.
Oh, been plenty. I'm very lucky that quite a few of the games I've worked on did get noticed. But people have a tendency to see only those. But there's plenty others. And one I worked on came out last year that we emailed a little bit about, called Deformers. That was made, so I worked a little bit on the order with Jason Graves. He did 99% of that score. I don't want to oversell my involvement. But we worked a little together at the beginning, and I had this wonderful relationship with Ready at Dawn, the developer, and they're particularly one of their co-founders is this guy Andrea Pacino, who's this anomaly of a human being because he is a full-blown, like Stallone mid-70s bodybuilder. And no joke, if you look up Andrea Pacino, everybody get out your phones, look up Andrea. This guy, he's like 10 feet tall and 400 pounds of raw muscle. He looks like Colossus, I mean, he is a beast, and he like rides Ducati motorcycles. But he's the chief technical officer of Ready at Dawn. He built their engine from scratch. So he's this brilliant programmer and physics simulation guru, right? But he's also this conservatory-trained pianist. He grew up in Italy. He's got this thick accent, and he grew up in Italy playing piano. So he's this die-hard music lover. I mean, you start talking Puccini or Verdi with him, and he'll just burst into tears at the mention of it. And so I remember they called me down to talk about the order, and he pulled me aside from the meeting and had Journey and Banner Saga stuff, and was asking me to sign it and was asking me all these questions. And we became immediately really close friends, and we'll have these long, nerdy conversations. And so when working on the order, he started on a project that was kind of a tech demo for himself, just for fun, that grew and grew and grew until it became Ready at Dawn's next game, which was called Deformers. And he called me and he said, why don't you do the score? And I'm good. That's it. That's all I'm going to say. Literally write anything you want. I don't he said, this game is a much smaller budget than the order, but we've set aside, they set aside disproportional amount for score for the size of game that was. I mean, they really let me do whatever I wanted. And they said the only thing is there's no storyline whatsoever. The game is purely just blobs smashing into each other like Smash Brothers, except it's all about this physics simulation in a 3D kind of tilting, crazy, drunk environment. And the characters are like, you play like a ball of sushi and things like that. I mean, it's totally ridiculous. And so he said, I just embrace the insanity. And so I got to write the wackiest, weirdest score I have ever done. I worked with this incredible accordionist named Ksenia Sidorova, recorded her here at AIR, and a great brass ensemble doing like turbocharged mariachi music. And then there's orchestra. So Kristen, she plays all these penny whistles and bansuri and all these wonderful various kind of non-Western wind instruments, or non-orchestral wind instruments, I should say. And it just goes on and on. It's the weirdest, most bizarre whistling, like a spaghetti western that then goes into like this very posh waltz. And it's just weird. I have no idea how to explain any of that score. It was absolutely a blast. And the game came out and was played by 4 people, and the score heard by maybe 5 people. But it was, absolute privilege. It was one of those that it doesn't matter how many people played it. It was, and Andrea and I will forever be brothers, I think, on that. Yeah.